Hello there. Welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Licciardello.
Plenty to chat about this week. Our special guest is Joe Biden's last remaining Democratic presidential rival, Marianne Williamson.
We're also going to be looking at military funding. Does Biden really need Congress to support allies in Ukraine and Israel? And if not, what's he doing? But first...
The issue of abortion dominated the presidential election campaign again this week. First, as we reported on Wednesday night's Planet America, former President Donald Trump backtracked on his earlier support for a 15-week federal abortion ban, instead saying in the post-Roe versus Wade era, decisions about abortion should be left to individual states. The trouble for Trump is now exactly that, because the three Supreme Court justices he appointed took away federal constitutional protections for the right to have an abortion. State legislators, governors and courts are now free to impose more severe restrictions. So, from next month, abortions after 6 weeks pregnancy will be illegal in Florida. And this week, the Arizona Supreme Court triggered a law dating back to the 1860s, before Arizona was even a state, which makes all abortions illegal unless it is to save the life of the pregnant person. Well, that has caused widespread outrage and uncertainty, and it was a political gift to President Biden, who only narrowly won the state of Arizona in 2020, although he kind of flubbed his response by getting his centuries muddled up.
What do you say to the people of Arizona right now? We're witnessing a law go in place that dates back to the Civil War era.
Elect me. I'm in the 20th century, 21st century, not back then. They weren't even a state. I find... Sir, how does the... Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Well, whatever century it is, this is a real political headache for Donald Trump, who does agree the Arizona law goes too far.
President, did Arizona go too far? Did Arizona go too far?
Yeah, they did, and that'll be straightened out. And as you know, it's all about states' rights. That'll be straightened out. And I'm sure that the governor and everybody else are going to bring it back into reason, and that'll be taken care of, I think, very quickly.
Well, not that quickly, as it turns out. Democrats in Arizona immediately tried to repeal the abortion ban this week, but Republicans blocked them. In fact, Republicans refused to even examine the bill, Chaz.
Yeah, look, there's a reason that the 1864 law came into effect. It's because the Arizona state legislature wanted it to. You see, back in 2022, they did pass a 15-week abortion ban, i.e. people would be allowed to have abortions up to 15 weeks of pregnancy, but they inserted an interesting line in the legislation. They wrote that the 15-week ban bill did not repeal by implication or otherwise the 1864 law or any other applicable state law regulating or restricting abortion. The interesting thing, though, about the Arizona situation is it reflects what's been happening nationwide with Republicans and abortion. Back in 2022, Republican Senate candidate Kari Lake, if you recall, said this about the 1864 law.
I think Roe v. Wade should be overturned, and I think the Supreme Court, I have a good feeling that they're going to do the right thing this time. And again, I'll echo what Steve just said. We have a great law on the books right now. If that happens, we will be a state where we will not be taking the lives of our unborn anymore.
But now that that great law on the books has become a reality, Kari Lake realises it actually isn't very popular, and she's now saying that she opposes the ruling and she wants the state legislature to come up with an immediate common sense solution that Arizonans can support. The problem is, it's too late. She got what she wants and she's on the record now, much like many Republicans are, including Trump. Now, it might all be for naught anyway in Arizona because the Democrats already have a ballot measure in the works for a much more moderate 24-week abortion ban to be placed in the Arizona Constitution. They've apparently already got 500,000 signatures and they only need 383,000 to get it on the ballot in November. For that to get up, they only need 50% of the vote, which is going to be easy, I suspect. So in the end, all this Arizona court decision is going to achieve is to supercharge Democratic turnout for the election in November. Could work out extremely well for Joe Biden.
Yeah, and just so that we're clear on the timelines on all of this, when that 2022 law passed with a 15-week ban in Arizona, that had no effect because Roe versus Wade had not been repealed. The repeal of Roe versus Wade was last year, 2023. Yeah. So whether it was the 2022 law or the 1864 total ban law, both of them were just kind of seen as largely irrelevant or at best symbolic. Republicans in state legislatures, ever since Roe versus Wade became the law of the land in 1973, have been passing aspirational bills that then sat there inactive, so-called zombie laws. Now, of course, they're all being triggered. And so they're getting what they wished for, and in a lot of cases, including President Trump, they're realising that, this is a real political liability for us. But also significant in this, I think, as well as another bit of history, dating back to the 1860s, when they used this phrase, states' rights. That's code. That's a racial dog whistle. States' rights was used as a justification for continuing to have slavery prior to 1864. States' rights was also a way of justifying states continuing to allow segregation in their schools and in their neighbourhoods. So when we have people, particularly in the south of the United States, talking about states' rights around abortion, and bearing in mind more black and brown people proportionally have abortions because they have poorer healthcare generally, less contraception, less preventative measures. So medical and surgical abortions tend to be disproportionately black and brown people. So there is a racial element in all of this as well, just to further complicate things.
Well, actually, we can complicate it even further by not looking at what they're talking about now. Let's just consider what they're going to be talking about over the next 4 years if Trump wins the election. Because something you haven't heard much about is the Comstock Act. The Comstock Act is another ancient law from around 1870 that hasn't been enforced for decades. It bars the mailing, transportation or importation of obscene matter, which the law defines as including every article, instrument, substance, drug, medicine or thing which is advertised or described in a manner calculated to lead another to use or apply it for producing abortion. What that means is it would devastate the use of pills for abortions. There are about 70% of abortions in America right now. And it might severely impact even non-pill abortions. Trump has not been forced to take a position on whether he'll allow the Comstock Act to be enforced or not. And his people definitely want him to enforce it. This could be the real threat to abortion in America, and no one's even talking about it.
Yeah.
We really need to get him on the record on that.
Yeah, I think we're going to be talking more about the Comstock Act in the weeks and months ahead. It is potentially a major issue because, of course, without the option of mifepristone and other medical abortions, pharmaceutical abortions, people in Arizona who used to be able to travel an average of 36 minutes to an abortion provider, in a lot of cases provided by pharmaceuticals as well, they now have to travel about 2.5 to 3 hours out of state. So the additional burden of time, people having to take days off work, all these kinds of things, it's all adding up. So getting something through the post provided by a clinic in another state with instructions is now potentially going to become more problematic.
Yeah.
Now, President Biden was clearly very happy for the focus this week of the whole campaign to remain on this potentially winning issue for Democrats, abortion. But it did mean that his big policy announcement of the week kind of got lost in all of the noise and chatter. Trump's announcement that he would no longer support a federal abortion ban seemed very deliberately timed to step all over Biden's news cycle anyway, when Biden announced a new plan to give student debt relief to potentially tens of millions of Americans. Biden's earlier attempt at cancelling student loan debt was struck down by the US Supreme Court last year. He made the announcement this week, not coincidentally, in the battleground state of Wisconsin.
I will never stop to deliver student debt relief on hardworking Americans, and it's only in the interest of America that we do it. And again, it's for the good of our economy that's growing stronger and stronger, and it is. By freeing millions of Americans from this crushing debt of student debt, it means they can finally get on with their lives instead of their lives being put on hold.
Now, Chaz, there is no doubt that President Biden needs to do something to woo back younger voters, and he clearly hopes that this issue could be that. Many Americans have seen their student debts only grow since leaving college, despite making years and years of repayments. And the current high interest rates in the United States are certainly not helping matters. More than 90% of student loans are with the federal government, and they're paying, on average, anywhere from 5.5% to 8%. But private college loans are getting as high as almost 17% right now. So this is literally stopping people from even being able to buy their first home while ever they're saddled with this debt, which is at credit card rates in some cases.
That's absolutely true. And look, I know it's not sexy to go into the details of this, but a lot of people really care about the student
You're going to
issue.
make it sexy, I can tell.
I'm going to do my best. I think I should at least summarise Biden's policy quickly. Back in 2022, he tried to enact general debt forgiveness, which would have erased $10,000 of debt for people with incomes under $125,000. Plus, an extra $10,000 of debt would be forgiven for anyone who received Pell Grants for being low-income students. That was supposed to cost a little over $400 billion and was supposed to cancel at least some debt for 40 million people. But the Supreme Court blocked that for various reasons I'm not going to go into now. So then Biden tried a more modest reform. He introduced a new HEC-style repayment plan, which won't require any payments while you earn less than about $32,000 a year, and payments will only be limited to 5% of your income over $32,000 a year, down from 10% of your income, which it is currently. Once you make your monthly payment, all remaining interest for the month will be waived, and the entire loan will be forgiven after 10 years if you originally borrowed $12,000 or less. Finally, all student loans will be forgiven after 20 years, except for graduate school loans, which will be forgiven after 25 years. Now, that repayment plan is currently also in court, which takes us to Biden's new additions. He's going to forgive the debt completely for another 4 million people, and 10 million more will see over $5,000 of their debt forgiven. Another 23 million people will have their accrued interest on their loans wiped away. He's focusing particularly on the people John just mentioned, the ones who now owe more money on their loans than they originally borrowed. That's a lot of people. They'd have up to $20,000 of debt from interest erased regardless of their income. So this all adds up, John, and believe it or not, that is a super summary. If you want more details, I'll go into it on the PED podcast right there. But do you think it's going to work?
First, that was so hot. Second, it's going to work in a political sense because, Biden's not going to get legislation passed. He's going to try and do this through executive action. Undoubtedly, there will be more legal challenges in the courts, and probably no money goes into pockets before November's election. But you've still got, therefore, a reason for people with college debt to vote for Joe Biden for a second term, because he'll give them the $20,000 or $30,000 when he's re-elected. So it works for Biden either way.
That's a good point.
Thank you. Now to our first guest this week. Marianne Williamson is a best-selling author of self-help books who came to fame in the 1990s as a favourite of the then Queen of American television, Oprah Winfrey. Often referred to as a wellness guru, Marianne Williamson ran for the Democratic Party's presidential nomination in a large field in 2020, and she kind of stood out on that debate stage for what some saw as a refreshing change of approach and language.
The racism, the bigotry, and the entire conversation that we're having here tonight, if you think any of this wonkiness is going to deal with this dark psychic force of the collectivized hatred that this president is bringing up in this country, then I'm afraid that the Democrats are going to see some very dark days. We need to say it like it is.
Some saw her as a truth teller, others saw her as spouting hippy-dippy psychobabble. Still, Marianne ended her campaign before the voting began in the 2020 primaries. Last year, she launched a long-shot challenge to President Joe Biden for the Democratic nomination again. But then a dozen former Williamson staffers told Politico magazine that she was a, quote, boss who can be verbally and emotionally abusive, and that she subjected her employees to unpredictable, explosive episodes of anger, and that she could be cruel and demeaning to her staff. Well, that was very much at odds with Williamson's campaign themes of love and unity. And unlike in 2020, there have been no Democratic primary debates, of course, in this election cycle, denying Biden's rivals, including Williamson and Congressman Dean Phillips, a platform. And they both failed to win any delegates as a result. Phillips has dropped out of the race. Williamson briefly suspended her campaign in early February. She then got back into the race in late February, so she's technically still campaigning, at least for another few days. But Marianne Williamson did take a little bit of time off the campaign trail this week to have a fireside chat with us. So where is this campaign up to as far as you're concerned? Obviously, Joe Biden has enough delegates to be the Democratic nominee. So why are you continuing your presidential campaign?
Well, my campaign at this point is what we call a message campaign. The things that I was talking about, I think are important. And the fact that Joe Biden got the number of delegates that he needs in order to be the nominee means that he got the horse race, which is, in this country, I must say, quite engineered. But then there's a whole other realm of things, and that has to do with what's really going on in this country at a deeper level, a more expansive conversation. Often the political establishment, including their media cohorts, are more of an obstruction than a conduit for some of the deeper conversations that Americans need to be having, particularly at this point. So there's still a hunger for that. And on the states where I'm on the ballots, I have tomorrow I'll be leaving and I'll be going to New Mexico and Oregon. Then I'll give a talk in Baltimore and that will be it. Then I will feel that I said what I had to say to the people who are interested in hearing it to the best of my ability, and we'll wrap this up.
Okay, so what ideas in particular are you hoping to focus on with your campaign?
Well, how the United States runs. You know, famous American President Abraham Lincoln said that the men who died for the North at the Battle of Gettysburg in the Civil War had died so that a government of the people, and by the people, for the people, would not perish from the earth. But it's perishing now. We're not a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. We are a government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations. We are more than not governed by a matrix of corporate overlords. This has to do with insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, big food companies, big chemical companies, big agricultural companies, gun manufacturers, big oil companies, and defense contractors. We're living at a time in the United States where 39% of Americans are reporting that they are regularly skipping meals in order to pay their rent. This is the deep, dark, dirty secret of the United States, the dark underbelly that, to be honest, I think people in countries such as yours are sometimes clearer about than even many Americans are. Because at this point, our government, in too many cases and in too many ways, actually enables those forces because those forces are their donor class. It's a very corrupt system that we've developed here, and somebody has to talk about it.
I wonder, do you think if a prominent elected Democratic official, a governor or a senator, were to have challenged Biden in this primary, do you think that they would have been able to defeat Biden, or are there sort of too many institutional barriers in the party to that?
Well, first of all, we did have a U.S. Congressman, Dean Phillips, who did seek to oppose Joe Biden. But the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, simply decided that with this quite astounding sense of entitlement, they simply decided that there would be no primary, that no one would be primarying an incumbent president. Now, the U.S. Constitution gives no special assignation to an incumbent president any more than to an incumbent senator or to an incumbent congressperson. This was just this concocted narrative, and it's very unhealthy for our democracy. The contention was that Donald Trump is such a danger to our democracy, which he is, don't get me wrong. But their idea was that he is such a danger that we would basically need to suppress democracy in order to save democracy. I personally believe, and I think many people do, that had the Democrats had a robust primary with myself and anyone else who chose to run, that whoever was the candidate, including the president, would be in a far better position today.
Now, Marianne, when you do something like run for president, I imagine you get a peek behind the curtains at scenarios that normal people just do not see, and we just don't even know they exist. So what have you learned from the process of running for president that most surprised you?
What I learned both times is that the system is more corrupt than I feared, and that people are more wonderful than I might have hoped. What I learned both times, except this time magnified by 10, is that the American people are not the problem. We're a decent people, we're an intelligent people, we're no different than the people anywhere else, no better, but no worse. And the American people are very concerned. And there is a strong anti-corporatist feeling in this country on both right and left. People are figuring it out, that the real dichotomy is not between left and right. The real dichotomy is between the powerful and the powerless, between those who have capital and access to ever more amounts of capital versus those who are just struggling to get by. When you have almost 40% of the American people skipping meals in order to pay their rent, when you have people throughout the poorer neighborhoods in the United States selling their blood plasma in order to pay their rent, when you have 1 in 4 Americans living with medical debt, the majority of Americans living paycheck to paycheck, 70% of Americans who are reporting that they live with constant economic stress. The American people are not stupid.
Of course, Marianne, one of the things that happens when you're not being ignored by the media is that you face scrutiny and you face criticism. And I wonder, how have you felt about the kind of narratives that we've heard? One being that Marianne Williamson is just running for president because she wants to sell a bunch of books. This is just a book tour. Also that, well, Marianne Williamson is an awful boss. She shouts at her employees and as a result, they won't work for her anymore. What do you say to those kinds of criticisms?
Well, first of all, I've written 15 books. I know about book tours. I know how to sell books. You don't run for president to sell books. If you want a book tour, you go on a book tour. So these people who tell you that, last time, every single candidate, I think 21 of them or whatever, had a campaign book because that's kind of what you do. I remember when Obama ran and he had The Audacity of Hope, but I was not out hawking my book. And a couple of them were, by the way. So that was just a narrative meant to demean me. And it was, interestingly enough, it was created by someone who does not know me, does not know my career, and certainly doesn't know the book publishing industry. It makes no logical sense. In terms of how kind of boss I am, I'll put myself next to any man who is running or any man who's running a business in this country, and that includes our president, by the way. If I, this is misogynistic fodder. I think I'm tough, but I was running for president, by the way. I've said the F word a few times in my life when I wish I hadn't. But once again, is there any man who has not in the office?
So having now been through this process, having expressed the discontent that you have with the Democratic Party machine, if not your fellow Democrats, what is your thinking right now, heading towards November? What do you think are Joe Biden's prospects of winning? Will you support Joe Biden or would you consider supporting Robert F. Kennedy or somebody else?
My decision has to do with the greatest opportunity to make sure that Donald Trump does not get anywhere near the White House again. I will not do anything. I will not vote for anyone, and I will not say anything that I think in any way makes it a greater probability that Trump would win again. He is the existential threat to our democracy. So I believe that my ideas are ones that would help the president in 2024. And so that's where my heart lies. I just want to do what seems to me at any given moment like the best chance to make sure Trump is the electoral door is barricaded. And I think a lot of that is going to be made clearer over the next few months. You and I are talking in April, and the election is not until November, and a lot of things can happen.
And Marianne, so just to be clear there, from what you're saying, you're not necessarily saying you will support Joe Biden. So if Robert Kennedy were to be at, say, 40% in the polls ahead of Biden, then you might consider supporting him if you see him as the best alternative to beating Trump.
There are some of the things that Bobby says when he talks about things such as corporate capture of the agencies. I disagree with him quite a bit about Israel. I disagree with him quite a bit about Ukraine. But I don't feel particularly how the Democratic Party has acted. Not that, listen, how I was treated is not going to determine my vote. My vote will have to do with the issues I care about, and will have to do with making sure that Trump does not win again. But I don't feel at this point I owe anyone anything more than that. I'm talking about what I care about, and it might just be that when I'm done with this, people will have heard enough from me. But I have nothing to commit to right now because, to be honest, I don't know myself.
Marianne Williamson, we wish you well on this final phase of your presidential campaign, and thank you for having a fireside chat with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate being here.
Still on the campaign trail, and a quick poll update for you. And the recent trend in national general election polls seems to be continuing. Trump's lead, dating back to September last year, continues to wane somewhat. A poll from Ipsos for Reuters had Biden 4 points in front this week, while YouGov's poll for The Economist had Trump still 1 point ahead in a five-way contest. Morning Consult had Trump up by one as well, while Monday's Tip poll had Joe Biden 3 points ahead nationally, although they are tied in a five-way split. Trump has been holding on to his lead in a lot of these swing state polls recently, but he could be a bit worried about this poll out of a state that he won twice, North Carolina. He's leading now by just 2 points there, and 3 points is his lead in that five-way split. Still, a lot of Democrats think that they can maybe pick up North Carolina as a hedge, particularly if they lose a state like Georgia.
Yeah, North Carolina was the closest state in 2020 that Biden lost. He only lost it by about 1.5 points, so you think it's makeable, especially given the demographics have changed quite a lot. A lot of blue staters moving into North Carolina cities. But it's not to protect against Georgia. The hedge is not Georgia. If the Democrats... So Biden only needs to win Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin and the single electoral vote in Nebraska to win the election. So really, they don't need Georgia. What they need is Michigan.
Right.
If they lose Michigan, then North Carolina could be a hedge for that, which means we keep on talking about the Israel issue and Michigan Muslim voters, etc. That's not an issue if they win in North Carolina. That's why it matters.
Yeah. I guess it's going to be a close enough election that pretty much every one of these swing state matters at the end of the day. The impasse continues, meanwhile, over US funding for the defence of Ukraine in the face of the Russian invasion. While there is majority support in both the House of Representatives and the US Senate to continue to provide tens of billions of dollars in military aid, the fragile Republican majority in the House has seen Speaker Mike Johnson unwilling to bring it to a floor vote, which it would win. Now, that could cost him the speakership if he does bring it to a vote, though, because once again, a relatively small group of Conservatives are holding a Republican speaker to ransom. Just like Kevin McCarthy last year. This time, it's the likes of Georgia's very Trumpy Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. Yes, her of the Jewish space lasers. She's threatening to oust Speaker Johnson if he allows a vote on this. And this week, she's been circulating a letter to her colleagues calling for his ouster, looking to drum up support to dump Johnson. Johnson and Taylor Greene met this week to try and reach some kind of an accommodation, but seems no dice, at least not yet. Greene, who seems to be taking a lot of her cues from President Trump down in Florida at the moment, is upset that Johnson allowed budget bills to pass earlier this year and avert a government shutdown. And she says that Ukraine funding and a foreign intelligence reauthorization bill, for her, would be the final straw.
This is difficult to do. This is not what I would like to be doing, but I believe it's necessary. This isn't a personal attack against Mike Johnson himself or his staff in any way, but Mike Johnson has completely betrayed our conference, and his leadership cannot be allowed to continue going forward.
Yeah, it's not personal, but he's betrayed us and we're going to sack him. Meanwhile, Mike Johnson is heading to Mar-a-Lago this weekend to try and sweet-talk Trump into saving his job. He's even offering Marjorie an advisory role as to what's being called his kitchen cabinet. I don't know if that's going to work.
No, I don't think it is. Taylor Greene's even been implying that God is displeased with Mike Johnson. She's tweeting out that God is sending America strong signs to tell us to repent. Earthquakes and eclipses and many more things to come. I pray that our country listens.
She knows that that eclipse was going to happen even if Trump was president, right? Does she know that? She doesn't know that.
I don't know what she knows, John. I'm just glad she's in a position of power. But maybe why God is so upset is because Ukraine apparently hates Christians.
But let's talk about what this really is, Steve. This is a war on Christianity. The Ukrainian government is attacking Christians. The Ukrainian government is executing priests. Russia is not doing that. They're not attacking Christianity. As a matter of fact, they seem to be protecting it.
Now that is pure Russian propaganda that she's parroting there. Ukraine is not fighting Christianity. They're defending themselves against an invasion. And in fact, Putin has in the past persecuted a number of other religions, including non-Russian Orthodox denominations of Christianity.
Yeah, and the same Moscow memo seems to have circulated, not just in some members of the Republican Congress, but Tucker Carlson, his version of that this week was the Israelis are persecuting Christians as well. questioning whether they should continue that support. But it turns out maybe President Biden does not even need Congress to appropriate the funds to keep the aid flowing to Ukraine. At least some experts are of that view, Chaz.
Yes, I was surprised to read claims that of the $18.9 billion of Ukraine's Security Assistance Initiative funding that's been approved since 2022, production orders have only been placed for $12.3 billion of it. And as for the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which allows America to provide excess equipment from its stockpiles to help Ukraine out of the $11 billion of Drawdown Authority in 2022, they only used $9 billion of it. And in 2023, they only used $4 billion out of a possible $14.5 billion of authority. Meanwhile, in Israel, it seems to be the opposite situation. They're getting more weapons than we knew about. Between October and December last year, the US apparently transferred 15,000 extra bombs and 57,000 extra artillery shells to Israel. And since December, those transfers have increased by about 15%. In particular, Congress was just informed about 100 recent foreign military sales to Israel. Why such a large number of sales? Well, if you keep them small enough to not reach the mandatory disclosure levels, the contents of those sales can remain secret. But apparently they include precision-guided munitions, small diameter bombs, bunker busters, small arms, and other lethal aid. Well, I'm going to want that all to be confirmed, thank you very much, and explained. So I thought we should ask someone that we trust, a friend of the show and defence budgeting expert, senior fellow from the America Enterprise Institute, Mackenzie Eaglen. Mackenzie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So is it true that of the $19 billion in Ukraine's Security Assistance Initiative funding appropriated in 2022 to 23, only a bit over $12 billion is actually being placed in production orders so far? And if so, why is that?
So you might know that Washington is a little dysfunctional, not just all the time, but especially these days. And so because the appropriations, the way it kind of works is you and I live in calendar years. Congress lives in fiscal years, which runs 3 months off of a calendar year. And then the way money works is you can have 1 year money, 2 year money, 3 year money, 5 year money. And it kind of rolls through the system like an air bubble in a garden hose. And so the money is working its way through the system. This is like basically an Amazon gift card to the U.S. Defense contractors who build equipment for our armed forces. All of these things take time to sort of move through the system, that garden hose, so to speak. And so while some things are maybe still being put into the shopping cart, others are being negotiated to put under contracts, and others are in production. And that's just kind of how it always works, even for our own military.
Okay, that kind of makes sense for budgeted funding, but what about drawdown authority? That's meant to be spent year by year. So is it also true that in 2022 and 2023, they left a combined $12 billion of presidential drawdown authority on the table? And if so, why is that?
So again here, after the invasion, Congress realized that the authority amount was far too low, particularly for major grinding, long duration wars like we're seeing in Ukraine, but now unfortunately also Israel and Hamas. And so Congress repeatedly increased the authority cap. So it went from $100 million to $11 billion in 2022 to $14.5 billion in 2023. So part of this is linked to this continual increase in what's allowable and what's doable, how much the president can draw from our own stockpiles. And then another consideration in terms of, why do things take so long, or why is money left on the table? There was some sort of auditing or paperwork challenges where the Pentagon said we overvalued aid. It's still a little fuzzy what all that means. But then there's also $4 billion left in authority right now, currently unused, that I'm sure the White House and the Pentagon are working through.
So does that mean that this spending authority that's not being used can now be used in Ukraine, even if Congress doesn't pass its funding bill?
So as of March, last month, $3.8 billion is left in presidential drawdown authority. And that is being reviewed and worked in the system. And it still can be used and applied and sent over to Ukraine. And presumably it will be as soon as possible.
Okay, let's turn to Israel. These 100 small, secret military sales to Israel that were recently revealed, when you add them all up together, how much could we be talking about in total here?
But it seems it could be several $billion, which is a lot, relatively speaking, but also, you say secret, I say, following the rules. The question, Congress will certainly want to look more into this because it seems to be overt subterfuge, but at the same time, there are thresholds, and if you operate below them, in theory, the State Department is following the rules.
Mackenzie, Section 6201 of the Foreign Assistance Act forbids arms exports to any country that prohibits or otherwise restricts, directly or indirectly, the transport or delivery of United States humanitarian assistance. Now, isn't that something that Biden has specifically accused Israel of doing in the last few weeks? So how aren't these weapons transfers illegal?
Different parties have different interpretations of facts on the ground. If you listen to testimony recently from the U.S. Central Command commander before Congress, for example, he was much more careful than the president in splitting these hairs. He sees other obstacles on the ground to aid delivery that in most scenarios until, just very recently, that it was not Israel, but the inability on the other side of the fence for those in Gaza, for example, to take the aid in, for the distribution of that aid, for the trucking and logistics and other components necessary, but also just the stringent approval process by whoever's on the other side of the fence, whether that's Hamas or other aid organizations. I don't want to be cute about it. I think that there are instances, perhaps many so, of Israel prohibiting, slowing, or blocking. But then on the flip side, there are instances where Israel can point to where they have dropped off the aid, left it at the checkpoint, and nobody is able to process or get it to people who need it quickly.
Finally, what does the breakdown in bipartisanship mean for the future of America's defence and that of your allies like us?
There are real-world implications to a breakdown in bipartisanship for defense. And just yesterday, the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO testified before Congress and basically said more Ukrainians will die quickly because of the inability to get the National Security Supplemental passed in the House of Representatives. And he used, for example, artillery shells, 155s. And what he said was, in the last year, for example, on the ground in Ukraine, for every one shell Ukraine can fire at Russia, they can fire 5 back. By not giving Ukraine additional aid right now, that ratio exchange will go from 5 to 1 to 10 to 1. So you can just imagine the wounded and killed in action as a result of the inability of Washington to figure things out, to get along, and to get to yes. It's pretty serious and pretty dire.
Mackenzie Eaglen, thank you so much for answering some very hard questions on the Fireside Chat.
Thank you for having me. A pleasure to be with you.
There is a lot happening on the Trump legal front right now. The first criminal trial involving Donald Trump finally gets underway next week. This is the New York fraud case brought by Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, which alleges that Trump falsified business documents to cover up hush money payments to 2 women he had affairs with, including Stormy Daniels. The fact that he was allegedly committing a crime to cover up another crime is what makes this a criminal case, but that in itself could prove to be a little bit tenuous. We will see. Jury selection starts next week. Motions to dismiss and delay the case have been denied now. A lot of gag orders have been flying thick and fast, as have Trump's defence claims that the trial judge themselves should be replaced. This is Judge Juan Merchan, who donated small amounts of money to Joe Biden's 2020 campaign. That may not be such a big deal. Bigger deal, his daughter is a Democrat operative. So even before this trial starts, Donald Trump is saying, Chaz, it is all political and it's all rigged.
He sure is. He's posting about how Merchant should be removed from this Trump non-case immediately and how his daughter Lauren is a rabid Trump hater. But what's the judge's daughter got to do with anything? Well, Firstly, what appears to be her Twitter account has a profile pic of Trump behind bars, which Trump doesn't like at all, although no one seems to have tweeted on that account for 4 years. And according to a New York judicial spokesperson, that account no longer even belongs to the judge's daughter since she deleted it a year ago. But he says it's not linked to her email address, nor has she posted under that screen name since she deleted her account. Now that's all odd, because the account still obviously exists with old tweets. We saw the screen cap. But anyway, I'm not sure that the profile pic is such a big deal. What's probably more of a deal is, as John said, the judge's daughter is the president of a political consulting company called Authentic Campaigns, which has collected at least $70 million in payments from Democrat candidates in the last 6 years, including Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, amongst others. Now, why is this particularly relevant? Is because, according to New York law, the judge should disqualify himself if a close relative, i.e. a daughter, has an interest that could be substantially affected by the proceedings. So, you make up your own mind if Trump's claims are unreasonable. Jesse Waters has certainly made up his mind.
The judge's daughter isn't 7. She's 34. He's not attacking her. He's just saying what she does for a living. How's that an attack? He just wants a new judge, one whose family isn't funded by Democrats.
Okay, so what's the problem here? Well, it's now been 3 different court cases where judges have imposed gag orders on Trump, and Trump has responded by attacking not only the prosecutors and judges, but also their families, which you might say is Trump's choice under free speech rules. He can do that. But there is another side to this. Threats against judges have more than doubled since late 2020, when Trump significantly increased his criticism of the judiciary. And since the start of Trump's campaign in late 2022, he's gone after judges or their family members by name at least 138 times. And this can have real consequences. Ask Judge Engeron and his clerk, who faced this kind of response a couple of months ago.
Her address is in the public domain. Her personal emails have been compromised. Her personal cell phone has been compromised. She gets dozens of messages, as you mentioned, on her social media, her personal email, and her personal cell phone every day. And the threatening phone messages and voicemails that have been directed at the judge and the clerk combined fill 275 single-spaced pages as transcribed.
275 pages is a lot of threats. Some judges have gotten so concerned about this state of affairs that they've even turned up on CNN to express their concern.
Well, it's very disconcerting to have someone making comments about a judge, and it's particularly problematic when those comments are in the form of a threat, especially if they're directed at one's family. I mean, we do these jobs because we're committed to the rule of law, and we believe in the rule of law, and the rule of law can only function effectively when we have judges who are prepared to carry out their duties without the threat of potential physical harm.
But then that interview of a sitting judge prompted Trump supporters to cite it as proof that New York judges are biased against Trump. Regardless, Trump has continued to attack the judge's daughter by name, even after a gag order was placed on him to stop him doing that. He practically dared Judge Merchan to enforce the gag order, posting, "If this partisan hack wants to put me in the clink for speaking the open and obvious truth, I will gladly become a modern-day Nelson Mandela. It will be my great honour. We have to save our country from these political operatives masquerading as prosecutors and judges, and I'm willing to sacrifice my freedom for that worthy cause." So, John, how much of a problem is this, and what should the judge do about it?
Well, it's going to be very tempting for judges in this case and other cases where, unlike the civil cases and the criminal cases, Trump is in the court and he's going to be very potentially showing contempt for that court, which could lead him to being sanctioned, including put into prison for short periods of time. The other thing, of course, is that the jury pool, they've received a summons to appear at a New York court next week to then go through what is a 40-plus page questionnaire to try and find out if they are impartial on the subject of Donald Trump. That's going to be really hard to do. Yes. One of the many things that they will have no doubt heard out of Trump's mouth and out of the media is that these cases are being run by partisan Democrats, it's a witch hunt, it's all rigged, etc., etc. So, you know, people that want to be on the jury are going to say, oh, I have no particular opinions on all of this. But of course, it does poison the pond. So, yeah, Trump has very successfully delegitimised, politicised and personalised these cases, attacking the judges and the court officials and their families, sowing seeds of doubt in the minds of voters as well as potential jurors, that means that he will possibly just diminish the impact of a potential guilty verdict and possibly make future sentences look extreme, maybe even provide him with grounds for future appeal.
I just want to add two quick things. The first of which is, as for Lauren Merchant, whether she's benefiting from whatever happens in the trial, I don't see how her taking a consultancy gig, she's going to make more or less money, whether Trump goes to jail, is found guilty or not.
Yeah.
Like, she's getting money for Democrat campaigns.
That's why when the
which will
court
exist
looked at
regardless.
this issue last August, they said, no, this is not a conflict that should see the judge recuse himself.
The second thing I'd say is a bit of free advice for Judge Merchant here. He does have the ability to jail Trump, which Trump clearly wants.
Yeah.
He also has the ability to impose community service, which is a smaller penalty, but it means he can get Trump to, say, pick up some rubbish on the side of the road for a few days. Trump will not like that at all.
Or he could just send Trump's hairpiece to jail. He'd like that even less.
So many options, John.
Yeah.
But before we go, just a quick correction. A few weeks back, we said that footballer Aaron Rodgers immunised himself, against COVID-19 with ivermectin. Actually, he treated himself with the human version of ivermectin, amongst other things. But RFK didn't choose Rodgers for his VP pick anyway, so tough like Rodgers, I don't know why I brought him up. But anyway.
That's it for another Fireside Chat. We'll see you for Planet America next Wednesday from 9 p.m. on ABC iView, 10 p.m. on ABC TV.
And both shows are also on YouTube and Facebook. And don't forget to PEP, the Planet Extra podcast can be found right there.
Bye-bye.